Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First, these blossoms here are just spectacular and very wonderful to see, very pure and fresh and encouraging. So in the past weeks, I've been talking about aspects of practice, and tonight's topic continues. One of the practices that we find if we stay in the monastery for any long period of time, or if we live in a temple for a very long period of time, one might do death practice. And it sounds a bit extreme, and for some, if one is in a training monastery for a long period of time, death practice is about viewing oneself dead and really imagining the body decaying, or maybe even imagining the body lying out in a meadow and the birds eating it and the animals coming and feeding on one's body. It sounds very gory and so forth, but of course the body is going to decay when we die, and so the practice is to let go of fear of death and the recognition of the temporality of life. And when we do that, when we really realize how brief this life is, it is so quick, and we really recognize and accept that we are going to die, life becomes very potent and wisdom appears in the midst of death practice. So it's a very potent thing. Lay people tend not to do this. Very difficult for lay people to engage in this particular kind of practice. Lay people often have families and are engaged in how to keep the family going and how to live and how to just do daily life. So death practice isn't done so much by lay people. At the same time, I'm not suggesting that lay people don't know that they are going to die. I'm sure lay people do know they are going to die. But it's not an actual practice, I think, so much as we see in lay practice. But what I want to talk tonight about is this book that I recently read. I recommend it to everybody. And it's called Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. And it's a fairly small book. It's only about 115 pages or so. And and it's a small book. You know, the pages are short. So you read it in a couple of hours. I think Bob said this morning that he had read it. And so the Anthropocene is the name of the geologic period that we are in that has been named for our time. And learning to die in the Anthropocene has to do with the recognition that our civilization is dying. And that very likely, or at least according to this fellow who's writing, his name is Roy Scranton. He was in Iraq. He was a military man in Iraq. And so he says it's unlikely that we are going to survive. And so his point ultimately in the book is, so how do we learn to die well? We're all going to die, but we don't all die well. But how do we die such that we live the years that we have, the time that we have, in such a way that we deepen and we enrich the time that we have, and that we do it with some grace and some humanitarian spirit. So forgive me for the amount that I'm going to read in this tonight, but I'll try not to do too much, but I can't improve on some of this, and I'll read it slowly because I just have notes throughout. And but the thesis of the book is that we have failed to prevent unmanageable global warming, and that global capitalist civilization as we know it is already over, but that humanity can survive and adapt to the new world of the Anthropocene if we accept human limits and transience as fundamental truths and work to nurture the variety and richness of our collective cultural heritage. Learning to die as an individual means letting go of our predispositions and fear. Learning to die as a civilization means letting go of this particular way of life and its ideas of identity, freedom, success, and progress. These two ways of learning to die come together in the role of the humanist thinker, the one who is willing to stop and ask troublesome questions, the one who is willing to interrupt, the one who resonates on other channels and with slower, deeper rhythms. Already sounds like Zen practice to me. But he says that chapter 1, he's talking about human ecology, which traces the relationship up through our current moment and our contemporary predicament. Essentially, we were saying on Saturday, we knew about, there were some teachings of global warming in 1895, and then mid-century we knew more, and then in the 70s we knew more and more and more and more, and we have failed to pay attention. In chapter 2, he talks about carbon-filled capitalism and its techno-utopian ideologues have promised infinite growth and infinite innovation, yet they have proven incapable of saving us from the disaster they have made. Chapter 3, he talks about carbon politics, and he considers how our collective failure to respond to climate change is an effect of the very structures of our political systems and the way that they are built around decentralized flows of oil and gas. Chapter 4, he talks about the compulsion of strife, something progressivist belief in the infinite perfectibility of the human animal depends significantly on carbon-fueled capitalism's promises of infinite economic growth. And I think it's in that chapter 2 that he, very difficult to swallow, is that no longer are our demonstrations viable or are they listened to, because there's nothing at stake. Everybody goes out on the street and says, stop this, but there's nothing at stake. And he talks about how when the coal miners went on strike, everybody listened. The people at the top listened because there was no coal coming out of the mines. And the coal, prevented our having energy. Coal is still used in producing energy, and people's homes were not being warmed. So you listen to when that sort of thing is happening. But, for most of us who go out on the street and stand up and yell about something, it doesn't matter anymore. And that's very discouraging. But his point, I think, is well taken in this. He says, the odds that civilization's surviving are negligible. the odds of our species surviving are slim. The trouble we find ourselves in will likely prove too intractable for us to manage well, if we can manage it at all. So, we go from there then. I skipped many chapters here. Under the compulsion of strife. He's talking here about political function as collective vibration to a philosophical function of interruption. He essentially encourages interruption. And it seems to me that it's not necessarily an individual thing, but it certainly can be collective in communities where we interrupt the fear or we interrupt our response to something terrible happening in the news, literally by not responding. He says the function of interruption, as opposed to disruption, which shocks the system and breaks holes into pieces, interruption suspends continuous processes. It's not smashing, but sitting with, not blockage, but reflection. And then he says, responding freely to constant images of fear and violence, responding freely to the perpetual media circuits of pleasure and terror, responding freely to the ongoing alarms of war, environmental catastrophe, and global destruction, demands a reorientation of feeling so that every new impulse is held at a distance until it fades or can be changed. While life beats its red rhythms and human swarms dance to the compulsion of strife, the interrupter practices dying. I think this is not entirely unlike what I have encouraged for many years, that if you choose to watch the news, you practice, you actually practice, and you see the truth in any of the disasters that you see the truth of Buddha light. So here is more philosophical humanism. No, that's not what I wanted, excuse me. This is James Baldwin. One is responsible to life. It is the small beacon in that terrifying darkness from which we come and to which we return. One must negotiate this passage as nobly as possible for the sake of those who are coming after us. Now, the author's been, along with this, has been making a case that we pay attention to history, that we reach back and that we know our own history, that we know the values that have come through history and the great learning and wisdom that has come through our great teachers who have lived before. He says, as I learned in Iraq, and have had to learn again and again, the practice of learning to die is the practice of learning to let go. Learning to die means learning to let go of the ego, the idea of the self, the future, learning to let the certainty, attachment, the pursuit of pleasure, permanence, and stability. Learning to let go of salvation. Learning to let go of hope. Learning to let go of death. So he's suggesting the importance in his chapter, it's called New Enlightenment. And he's talking about, once again, the importance of studying the humanities and having literature and music and art be part of our lives. The study of the humanities is nothing less than the patient nurturing of the roots and heirloom varietals of human symbolic life. This nurturing is a practice not strictly of curation, as many think of today, but of active attention, cultivation, making, and remaking. And under a new enlightenment, he says, a new form of life has become evident. Humanity has revealed itself as collective energy, light swarming across a darkened planet, a geological forcing, data and flow. We live in networks, webs, and hives, jacked into remote-controlled devices and autonomous apps, moments of being in time, out of time. No longer individual subjects or discrete objects, we have become vibrations, channelers, tweeters, and followers. By connecting us through our devices, photohumanist technologies enable collective wiring at tremendous speeds, even faster than those offered by radio, print television, and film. But here he gives this terrible warning, which I feel is almost upon us. He says, it is at least possible that in the fairly near future, enough communication and education will take place through anonymous internet aggregation that we could become vulnerable to a sudden, dangerous empowering of the hive mind. History has shown us again and again that a hive mind is a cruel idiot when it runs on autopilot. The dangers of collective madness, witch hunts, and totalitarian war exist in new social networks as much as, or even more as they did in early 20th century radio broadcasts, newspaper stories, and cinema reels. Our collective obligation to maintain traditional humanistic study in the photo-humanist era is at once developmental and prophylactic. We must practice interruption to nurture new flows and at the same time to guard against them. So this sense of hive mind, I think we can already see that apparent in our, at least to some degree, we can see that apparent in our culture. So just his last chapter. He begins the chapter with coming home, and his last chapter is coming home. We can practice and cultivate understanding the intimate, necessary connection to all things to each other. Light comes to us from millions of miles away through the emptiness of space, and we can see it. Its heat warms our skin. Pleasure arises in feeling ourselves attuned and connected to such sublime power. The only practical question remaining is whether we, existing as we are, will be that light. I missed the part where he quoted Dogen Zenji in here. But he did. He quoted Dogen Zenji, and I don't remember the quote, and I don't see it right immediately. Oh, here it is. He says, since we can't really know how to do something until we do it, learning to die also means accepting the impossibility of achieving that knowledge as long as we live. We will always be practicing, failing, trying again, and failing again until our final day. Yet the practice itself is the wisdom. In the words of Zen Master Dogen, to practice the way single-heartedly is, in itself, enlightenment. So this is I think this is a very fine way to practice that dying that we do in Zen practice. The recognition that we are here so temporarily, that life is fleeting. And usually written on our Han is, life is flying by so quickly. Do not waste this time by night or day. So I really encourage this book. It's a slight book, and it's a beautiful book. It's real and it's true, and I think it's deeply honest, sincere, and well-researched about climate change, and that we probably can't do anything about it. Says the only two roots are coal, if we capture the CO2 coming out as it's burned, and then, I guess, put it in the ground or store it, or nuclear. And if it were nuclear, we would have to build one nuclear plant a day and have it online, I think, for the next 3 years. And what do we do with the nuclear? What do we do with the nuclear junk? So we're pretty much doomed. His next book is We're Doomed. What now? So I think that the straightforwardness of it and the honesty of it shouldn't make us think that we don't take care of our recycling, or that we don't take care of our, driving and so forth. Of course we do. And we continue to fight until the end. But I think the reality of this, what I think is so excellent about it, is the aspect of dying, is the aspect of learning to die and accepting it, and then in that wisdom seeing the magnificence and beauty of life and restoring ourselves through history. He gives a long discussion about Gilgamesh and modernizes the story of Gilgamesh in his second to last chapter, which I recommend you read Gilgamesh if you haven't read Gilgamesh. And he looks at it and talks about it, and talks about the modern issues within that old. It's the oldest story that we have, the story of Gilgamesh. And so that we pay attention to history, we pay attention to our ancient wisdom, and we apply it within ourselves, and that we, as best we can, live it. Because whether there's climate change or not, we're not here for very long, no matter what. So maybe you have something to say or to... But the book, if you look at the title, you think, oh no, this is terrible. But it's really a very fortifying book. I found it so. I don't know if Bob agrees with that or not. I found it very, very positive book, actually.
How did I find it? I think the section that his treatment of the media, his discussion of interruption, and our tendency to transmit fear.
Yes.
We communicate fear constantly. Every time we receive an email or a tweet or something, we pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're circulating fear, or we're circulating hatred, or we're circulating...
Yes.
And what he's saying is interrupt that cycle.
Yes.
And stop. I mean, okay, so you get a tweet that is infuriating. Okay, deal with it. Sit with it, as he
erase
says.
It. You could just erase
yeah,
it.
or erase it. Yes, it's junk. But
Yeah.
I found that intriguing.
Yeah.
His treatment of.
Well, this is our practice in the face of that kind of environmental onslaught.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't contribute to that kind of garbage in the world. What is the Buddha's thing about leftovers? He says, when the leftover food is garbage, he says, you don't keep it, you don't eat it, right? So we don't eat that kind of garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often felt it's interesting. There are movies that I watched when I was an undergraduate that I can't watch anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I just find them so... either they're violent it's almost like taking poison.
Yeah.
Is the way it feels to me.
Yeah, you don't put poison into yourself.
Yeah.
And kids are watching them from the age of 3 and 4.
And they're much worse than...
And they're much worse than they were when we were younger.
Well, we most likely saw more violence in cartoons, and kids are not as affected by cartoons as they are by real life, actual people in violence in film. So, not that that's great, but that it's less affecting in cartoon form than it is in live bodies. Anyway, it's a difficult life out there, everybody. Please take care. I wish I was more uplifting, but I think I was trying to be, actually, by this fellow's assignment to us, in a sense, to engage in the humanities, to engage in deep material that is enlivening, that is enriching, that is restorative. And so let us not waste our time by night or day. So
I think an important thing to remember is to laugh.
Oh, indeed.
We're talking about how we pass on the negative and we pass on the fear, and
Yes.
and that's an evolved survival response from the Pleistocene when we.
Yes, it is.
But laughter is also talking about interruption.
Yes.
That's the function of laughter,
Right.
is to diffuse the fear.
Yes, that's very good.
To reduce
Yeah.
the stress. It's a
That's
social
right.
cue that it's okay.
Yeah. He says games
the
are
problem.
essential.
Mhm.
Somewhere in here, there are many things that I got, and I felt like I was reading too much. But careful reading, meditative reflections, teaching slowness, attention to detail, games. He's in here somewhere. He recommends games. So, and that is indeed the case, that in playfulness, play, he says play, something important happens for us, and that we transcend all of the angst that we carry in play. And so that's it too, play and laugh. So, yes, Donna.
I also think that dealing with the reality, as he is doing, is more enriching than the pretend world that we live in,
Yeah,
day by day.
yeah, right. That it's not really happening.
Right.
Yeah. It is. It's to say this is it. This is what we have, and this is the difficulty. Well, I feel for my grandchildren.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I've lived a long life, and yet my grandchildren, or anybody's children, or anybody's grandchildren, or the young people, even if they're not yours, the idea that they don't have a future. My granddaughter came home from school after a big research study and she said, we don't have 20 years, we have 10 years. 10 years. And I think one of them's already gone by since she did that study. So I feel for those kids who feel sold out by their older generations who did nothing. And yet there's nothing they could do to stop. I don't think that we're going to technologicalize ourselves out of the situation. Unless she was actually thinking that she was going to discover cold fission. Is that what it is? Fusion, excuse me. She said that she wanted to discover cold fusion. If we discover cold fusion, we got it made. So maybe she'll do it. Everybody thinks such a thing is crazy, but...
But not if she only has 10 years.
I don't know.
Miracles.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. And of course there'll be, some survival, but it's going to be a tough time for youth, for young people coming forward. But, we see the dying occurring, the collapsing of so many aspects of our culture and our life and what we hold together, the collapse of our health care, the collapse of these things just falling down and falling away. We have to deal with it, and we have to understand that it's going to happen, and many, many people are going to suffer in this process. So we have to do our best. Laugh and play and read good material and listen to good music, etc. So celebrate the ancient gods. So, all right.